there it is, so that you can go back and listen to the recording and share it with your partners. Just a few little housekeeping things to go over. You'll notice that you all are muted right now. However, you can use the chat function, which is on your screen. It's showing up on mine on the bottom left. Feel free to just chat with each other, share questions in the chat feature, or ask any questions of the presenters as well. When we get to a little further out in the webinar, we're going to be taking you all off the mute so that you can ask questions. And I think that's about it. Anything else we want to share, Althea, before we move on?
I'd say that's it.
Okay, fabulous. So I'm going to go ahead and pass the baton to Althea so we can move through the webinar together.
Great. Thank you, Camelia, and welcome everybody. I have to say, on behalf of the Data Harmonization Committee that was formed several months ago, we are excited to finally get to this point in time to be able to share this with you and hopefully move forward launching this forum to be able to collect data that will show the impact of our work. So Caleb, if you'll move it forward, please. So talking a little bit about the background of how we came to be in this process and the forms that you're going to be seeing. Keep going, Caleb. Let's talk first about the why, always beginning with the end in mind, why we needed to gather this data even to begin with. Delivering on the Dream certainly is an innovative initiative, and we really want to show the 3 I's, the total investment that has been allocated for this initiative, most importantly the impact of that investment, and what infrastructure we have been building, what capacity we've been building in all of the different collaborative regions and states through delivering on the Dream. So we want to certainly toot our own horn, so to speak, and understand the work that we've been doing. In addition, as you all know, we also need to be able to respond to our national funders about what this work is and what the impact is, especially important as we are looking at renewed funding or new funding for administrative relief. It'll be great to be able to show the progress of the work that we've currently done. So keeping that in mind, that it's really about showing our impact and responding to other stakeholders, that was the original intent of pulling this all together as a data harmonization team. So I want to tell you a little bit about the process that we went through. First of all, thank you to the committee members that we have. Reagan in Arkansas helped us out, and Leslie and Lena helped us out. And then we certainly got input from other people along the way. Really appreciate all of the input that we received. In addition to the committee, we asked several of our national funders for input. Some other members of you all, Alice and Roberto, gave us some feedback. We didn't ask everybody, thankfully, so that we weren't overwhelmed with great feedback, but got feedback from several of you. And we also asked some of our grantees for feedback to make sure that these tools were going to be something they could handle as well. With all of those great people in the process, we wanted to make sure we were building on the previous data collecting tools that we used, not starting from scratch, but rather continuing the good work we'd already done in data collection and building on that. Certainly one of the goals was to establish some common metrics across all the sites. I know they are very, very different in their structure and the breadth and depth of the work that they're doing, and so wanted to make sure that we had some basic common metrics that would be useful across all sites. And then we looked at some of the metrics that were used by other projects, and certainly NAC was one of them, so that we would be informed by good work that had already been done before. Okay, Caleb, if you'll move forward. So once we got into thinking about what metrics, we had certain considerations that we wanted to apply to those metrics. What was absolutely essential for us to track at the local as well as at the national level across all the Delivering on the Dream projects. What was interesting and optional to track and might be feasible to track but would not be essential to track. And we wanted to make sure we were avoiding what was difficult and impossible to track, and we got lots of good feedback of what those items might be. We also wanted to make sure, as we all know, that it's not just about the numbers, it's also about the qualitative information. How do we measure impact? Especially when we're building capacity, it's sometimes hard to tell that story just quantitatively, so we wanted to have a balance of numbers and stories, both at the grantee level as well as at the collaborative level, because all of that information is important, from measuring investment at the collaborative level to measuring infrastructure at the whole site level. And then one thing we came up against fairly quickly was that across collaboratives we call things different things. We call outreach events workshops, or outreach, or just case management, all sorts of different things, different language that we use for those descriptors. And so we tried to find common language and put some definitions in to make sure that we were all counting the same things in the same way. And lastly, we wanted to try and make sure that the process was as streamlined as possible so it would be easy for our grantees, easy for the coordinators at the collaborative level, and also easy for GSER to gather at the end of the day to be able to report to national funders. Okay, so let's talk about the reporting process itself. Quick overview first. I know some people, when they saw the JOT form and there were lots of different lines, might have gotten a little concerned about, oh my gosh, is this all new data? And actually it is mostly the same data as what we've gathered in the past. We may be describing it slightly differently, but I want you all to breathe a sigh of relief that we are getting pretty much what we did before in just a slightly different format. So the overview is that we're going to be having a grantee reporting form for each collaborative, and we'll talk about how that will happen in a second. But we will try and individualize a grantee form for each of the collaboratives. If you already have a form that you've been using with your collaborative, we're happy to talk about how we can adapt yours to make sure that you're capturing all the same information as what we'll need, so that you don't have to reinvent the wheel or just use ours instead, that you can continue to use yours. But we will have one grantee reporting form for each collaborative. Then we'll have a coordinator form that coordinators will use to gather all the grantee information and send it to GSER. Once we have the grantee reporting form in place for your collaborative, then what we would like is the coordinator to then share that grantee form with your cohort and provide training to them on how to use that form. We also are prepared to provide support if you need support on that training. I know some collaborative coordinators would like to do their own training and have regular meetings with their grantees, and so it's a very easy process for them to do, and some collaboratives may not have that ability, so we want to make sure we're there to provide that support. And then when the grantees complete their form on JOT form, which is the great tool that we're using, then that immediately goes into a Dropbox, your Dropbox, each coordinator's Dropbox, and an email alert will be sent that says, hey, you have a new report form in your Dropbox. So hopefully it should be a pretty seamless process for you to know which grantees have reported in, and then to be able to amass that information to do your coordinator reporting form and submit that to GSER. And Taki's asking a great question here, is the coordinator foundation staff or with the nonprofit? And is the cohort the nonprofit or the local funders? Thank you. Caleb, go back one second. So again, this is, I love how we call things different things across the country. So for the purposes of this conversation, the coordinator is the lead foundation staff, or I think in the case of the Bay Area folks, they have a nonprofit who is coordinating the cohort of grantees. So whoever that lead person is who normally gathers the reports, that's who we're calling the coordinator. And then the cohort is the cohort of your grantees, those people actually receiving your funds. So it's going to vary by collaborative. And in Tennessee, as Camelia is telling me, it might actually be the nonprofit who's the coordinator. So whoever is the one pulling together the information is the coordinator for this definition. Hope that helps, Khaki. And if not, just chat somewhere in the window. Okay, Caleb. And we can certainly share this information with each of the collaboratives together afterwards, after the webinar, if you have further questions about who the person is who should be coordinating on your end. Then continuing with the overview, the reports are going to be for funds in the current grant period. So not yet thinking about forward money or the potential of OSF, but the current money that you may be using. And I know we're all on different cycles based on our collaboratives. I know Arkansas and North Carolina recently started their funding, and some other folks may have already been months and months into their funding. In order to make it one whole cohort of money that went out the door on GSER's part, the timeline that you see here is the grant period is from October 1st of 2014 to September 30th of 2015. That's based on the national match timeline and not on our individual collaborative grant cycles. So that will bring up all sorts of questions of, what do we do, how do we report if it's going beyond that September 30th time. All the collaboratives will need to do interim reports that are sent to GSER October of 2015. And then when your grants end, you'll do a supplemental report using that same form. The grantee reports are due in September 7th, and then the coordinator reports are due in 1 month later, October 7th, and that'll give us enough time for GSER to get its report to national funders. So I want to make sure to take a second here and see if anybody has questions about the timing in the chat window. Okay, we'll move on. I know this has been an area of confusion in the past, and so I'm hopeful that this sounds clear to everyone. Okay, Caleb. So let's get down to the nitty-gritty of the reporting forms. The first one that we're going to deal with, Caleb, is the coordinator form. And the coordinator form is in 4 sections, and you all received an Excel spreadsheet earlier today that had both the coordinator form and the grantee form. So if you wouldn't mind opening up the coordinator form, and we'll go tab by tab. This is the same information that's in JOT form, but thanks to Camelia, we can see it all in one place in this Excel spreadsheet instead of rolling through the JOT form. And thanks so much to Leslie for having suggested that we present it this way. It'll be much easier for everyone to see. So the first thing to know about the coordinator form is that you'll only be completing the actuals for this grant cycle. You can ignore the proposed tab, and so can your grantees, because we obviously are all already in midstream with our grants. So you'll only be completing actuals. And for this one, for this cycle, you'll be completing Part 1, the basic information, Part 2, the financial report. You're going to skip Part 3A, and we'll disregard that until if and when, and I'm voting for when, all the future national funding comes in. So you'll do Part 3B, the actual deliverables, Part 4A, the short answer of the grantee summary, and Part 4B, the short answer for the coordinator. When we do get to national funding, then the next round of national funding, then we will have both proposed and actuals to report on. But again, for this, it's just the actuals. And one more piece that, before we dive into it, that you'll see is that we have put both DACA and DAPA fields in there Obviously, DAPA is not yet being implemented, but we wanted to have a tool that we could use for both, knocking on wood, as soon as DAPA is approved, that we could use that as well. So don't be distracted by the fact that DAPA is there. Obviously, because we're reporting on the current cycle and there is no DAPA, all of those fields will be left blank or be zeros as far as counting goes. All right, so let's, if you all would, pull up the coordinator form and go tab by tab. On tab 1, the cover and instructions, pretty self-explanatory, but note that these instructions are for the whole form, including the proposed deliverables, as well as the actuals. So, for instance, letter A under instructions, it says within 30 days after grants are awarded. I would say all of us are way past that. So you don't have to worry about doing two, one now and one later. This will just be for later in September. So the instructions hopefully are fairly self-explanatory. Camelia did a great job of putting these together, and our committee vetted them and re-vetted them several times. So let's move to part 1, the basic information. That's second tab. Again, pretty self-explanatory, collaborative name, who's completing it. And this goes back to Kaki's question about who is the coordinator. Whoever is gathering the information is going to be the one completing that. Then if we can move to the next tab, the proposed deliverables, the financial report. Here is an opportunity for us to explore what the investment was at the local and national level and what the expenses were. And you'll see a very important definition towards the bottom that is highlighted, pooled funding and other. We wanted to make sure the difference between pooled funding and aligned funding, which is described there, that pooled funding indicates grants that are jointly administered and then given to a collective fund to support the project, whereas aligned funding indicates that funders are participating with individual funding grants. So making sure to list those, if you would, when you're talking about each of your individual foundations' contributions and the collaborative contribution, that would be great. And then all of the grantees. I'm sure many of you remember that great map that GSER put together that showed the collaboratives and the individual grantees across the country. And so this helps in that kind of data gathering as well. All right, let us go to we're going to skip part 3A since those are the proposed, and get to part 3B, the actual deliverables. And just to make sure, we are going through this on an Excel form just to make it easy to see, but when you complete it, it will be on the JOT form. So we're just using the Excel form so that you can all see it all in one place at the same time. So here we are in the actual deliverables tab. And there were some great questions, really good feedback on the JOT form about, are all of those things required as we get further down the page on JOT form? And I think what we're going to do is try and make the required fields in red color or something along those lines to make sure that people are clear of what's required and what's optional. Here you'll see that all the gray section of the Excel spreadsheet is the required, and then the blue section is what's going to be optional. And Sally has this great question about once DACA is implemented, if someone is screened as eligible for both DACA and DAPA, how should they be counted? If I can, Sally, I'm going to put that in put it on the parking lot to answer when we get to open the lines and have that discussion. But great question. Thank you for asking that. So, so as we look at this, the first line 5, number of participants at all outreach events. We do want numbers here, and you'll see that the notes section to the right defines what we mean by outreach events. This again goes back to the fact that we count those differently. Some outreach events are hundreds of people, some are workshops, some are events at businesses, and so we wanted to label it one way and make sure people counted all of that within the same category. Line 7, the number of eligibility screenings and intakes. Again, we found that different folks talked about it in different ways. So screening and intakes include the legal services that you deliver at workshops and clinics and offices and other settings. We had some smaller nonprofits who someone would come in and want to start the process, and they would do intake and do a whole series of processes with that client and then turn them over as well to a legal provider. And so we're going to count those in this screening and intake part as well. The others, number of initial applications, renewal applications, and so forth, are fairly self-explanatory. So this is all about the people, right, the direct client service. In B, we're looking at how we're building the capacity of our field, of legal volunteers, of BIA-accredited reps, and of non-legal volunteers. So thinking again about the longevity and the brilliance of the collaborative in building infrastructure in our cities and counties and states that has long-term effect, this is where we want to capture the piece about field capacity. And then the last required segment, so to speak, is the age range of the folks that we're dealing with. Now, considering that we're still in DACA and not DAPA, obviously we'll be using only a couple of those fields, a couple of those lines, the under 18, 18 to 24, and 25 to 34. But we're assuming that once DAPA arrives, we'll have a wider variety of ages. And it was particularly important for some of our national funders to get a sense of those ages. Okay, so let's move here to the optional field. So everything else below is going to be optional. And so you'll see the first thing is about the number of cases handled through case management. And there was a question from several of our collaborative partners about what is case management? And so again, some of our nonprofits, if they're a legal service provider, they're doing case management in a very different way than a community center might do case management. So we wanted to acknowledge the contribution of some of those local community centers that where a client comes in and they help them obtain proof of residency. They help them get the birth certificate and their name on their child's birth certificate, translating documents, notarizing documents, all those things. So we wanted to make sure to acknowledge that with that kind of case management, which that term case management has so many different definitions in social work and legal work and so forth, but that's the definition we're using here. And then again, field capacity, again, optional, but if we could to find out how many new attorneys and how many community-based organizations are receiving technical assistance through this process. And then the ones below are the characteristics of the population served, and I won't go through explaining those, but we basically want to find out gender, their birthplace, and thanks to Alice for reminding us that we had forgotten Europe along the way, and where are they located, the years they are in the U.S. as well. And we are working on the definition of location, just so you all know. The census is really not helpful in distinguishing between rural and urban and suburban, and so we're trying to confer with some other folks who have experience in this to make sure we have a definition that's useful to us as well. Years in the U.S., educational attainment, I think that about covers our optional section here. So Kayla, here's where I would like to stop and open the phone lines if we could, and just see before.
The conference has been unmuted.
Great. Before we move into the summary section, just if there are any questions here with this more quantitative section of the coordinator form. Any confusion? Any questions?
This is Khaki in Tennessee. I don't have confusion on the quantitative form, but back on the financial report, can I jump back there, or would you rather wait?
Oh no, please, Kayla, can you jump us back?
I'm still not clear on pooled and aligned. Can you speak a little bit more to that?
Yes. And let me get that.
I read the text at the bottom. I'm still not quite clear.
Mm-hmm. Yep, and I invite Camelia or Felicia, who are even more familiar with the different iterations of the collaborative, also to jump into this. But if I'm not mistaken, there are some collaboratives in which, and I'll use the collaborative in North Carolina as an example, we have about a dozen different foundations who have all provided funding to Hispanics in Philanthropy. And so HIP is kind of the pooled resource for all of those funds, and we're the ones doing grant making. Whereas aligned may be a collaborative where, and Khaki, I don't know your Tennessee configuration, but let's say there are 3 foundations there who are all going to do work together in alignment but not pool their resources into one slot. Does that help?
Yeah, it sounds like Hispanics in Philanthropy is actually acting, it's almost kind of like a community foundation where the foundations grant to you and then you re-grant. Yes. But if in a situation where there's one of the nonprofits is a fiscal agent and all the foundations are making or most of them made the gifts directly to that nonprofit, those would be aligned, if I'm, pardon me?
Yes.
Okay.
That's how I understand it as well. And I'll just wait a second and see if Felicia or Camelia have any different definition for us.
Yeah, sorry, I was on mute. Thanks, Althea. Khaki, I agree in your case that, because all of the funders in the Tennessee Collaborative are making their own grants individually to the nonprofit, in that case it would be considered aligned funding versus, maybe all pooling your funds at the community foundation that would then, re-grant.
Yeah. Well, I think if there's an advantage in terms of y'all, your work with the national funders, if there's an advantage to be pooled, we could find an entity that would pool it, but it would be more of another level of administration. Mm-hmm. But if it's strategic, if y'all think it's more strategic, that would be something to have a conversation about.
Yeah, I think, the other folks who've done pooled funding can chime in. I think there's some additional hoops that you have to jump through, but there's also some benefits to it. So I'd be happy to chat offline, or other folks are welcome to jump in. But I don't think, we can discuss it a little bit further.
Okay, great. All right, so let's move on. And Caleb, I think we can mute everyone again.
Althea?
Oh, yes, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I'm sorry, this is Sally from the Immigrant Resource Center. Hello. Thanks for all your hard work on this. Just a clarifying question, maybe it's obvious to others. When it says characteristics of population served, am I to understand that may vary region to region? For example, some places, just thinking about how our partners might report on this. For most folks, it will be the legal services. They'll be able to track that data, but for the community education and outreach events, they don't have that level of demographic data. And is that what you were anticipating as well?
Exactly. That's exactly why we made some of those optional, knowing that some services may be very high touch and some may be at a distance. They have a community meeting and 300 people walk in. It's going to be impossible for them to do that. And it's one of the reasons that we have some of this as optional here in the quantitative side. And now when we move over to the qualitative side, you'll see that we'll be asking those questions in a more general way to kind of get a flavor for things when we couldn't get actual numbers for them.
I think that the example you gave of 300 people at an outreach event it'd be true for the age population characteristics as well to capture that? And so we don't need to define what the population served is when we collect that kind of data. Is that correct?
Well, we want you to do your best on the age piece because that's part of the required section, but everything else is optional. But again, it'll have to be a do your best for those kind of events. And I know it's going to be impossible to look at a room and say, maybe 400 of them are under 30. But yeah, there are some areas we'll just have to do our best.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. All right, let's take a quick look here at the survey section, part 4 of the coordinator form. And so you'll see, and I won't go through all of these questions. Again, you're going to be seeing those online on the JOT form. You're not going to be completing the Excel spreadsheet. It'll be online, but these are the same questions that you'll see online. We want to understand from the grantees both what they've learned from it, that overview as Sally was asking about the demographics. We want to have some general understanding of who was served. And then in addition, we want to understand how the grantee has been impacted by this, has their capacity grown, et cetera. And invite them to tell stories about clients that they served, about dreamers that they engaged, and other kind of non-traditional folks that they may have engaged, government, businesses, et cetera. So that's the grantee summary. And then for the coordinator summary, we'll be asking some similar things about what was the impact in your collaborative efforts? What did you learn from doing this? I know that every time we meet in person, we all seem to learn tremendously from each other's successes as well as challenges. So we want to capture that. What has changed in your strategies and how you have built the infrastructure in your site through the collaborative work. So that's the summary section. Let's jump over, and I'm just looking at time, recognizing I want to have a lot of time for question and answer. So let's jump over, if we can, to the grantee form. And you'll see in the grantee form very similar pieces. They'll be completing part 1, the basic information. They'll be ignoring the proposed deliverables for right now and only doing actual deliverables. And then they'll have their short answer section as well. And as you'll see, it's very, very similar to what we just went through in the coordinator piece. Basic information and the actual deliverables have all the same pieces because they'll roll up into your report, and then the short answers are the same that you're going to be summarizing at the end. All right. I think we can move on from there and get to the frequently asked questions. We've had several folks ask similar questions, so I wanted to address those first, and then we will open up the line for some other questions. So, so first of all, people ask, well, if we are starting midstream, what happens if our grantees haven't been collecting this data? And we acknowledge it's an imperfect system since we're all on different cycles, but we want to collect as much data as possible. So we're hopeful that in launching this form, which we hope to do very soon with you all, they will be collecting this data at least moving forward and hopefully be able to summarize in the short answer section about the work that they've already done. But we don't want them, if they haven't collected data, to go back and make up data or to knock themselves out to find data that they may not have collected. So we'll just go with what we have for the moment. There was also a question about using numbers versus percentages, particularly in the characteristics section of our demographics. And we talked about this at length in our data harmonization committee. And one of the challenges is that all of this information needs to roll up so that GSER can report it on a national level. So if we say percentages, that 10% of the folks seen were Latino in North Carolina, and 20% were Latino in Los Angeles, we're talking about two very different amounts of folks. 10% in North Carolina is going to be minuscule as compared to 20% in Los Angeles. And so we realized that really getting some raw numbers was going to be the best way for us to do it. So that's where we landed on. We are still having a further possible conversation about whether grantees could report percentages just on the demographics, on the characteristics, and coordinators would then apply that to the total number served. That was a suggestion from one of our collaborative members, and it's something that we may get a chance to talk about in the Q&A. But just so you know, that's why we're leaning towards the numbers. And someone else asked about the similarity between the quantitative and qualitative questions. And again, that was, in essence, trying to get in the qualitative side the stories, as well as to get the general feel for some of the items that we needed about characteristics to compensate for grantees not having collected that data or having a difficult time collecting that data moving forward. So it may seem a little bit duplicative, some of the questions in the qualitative section, but it was definitely intended to round out the information and make sure we had a good feel for what had happened during the grant. Okay, so let us move to that next place where we are going to open the phone lines and have a Q&A section. And Cynthia, I see you have a piece about Oregon. We'll submit the supplemental info since your grant period is in Phase 2 funds and the MOUs are being made available soon. So you're really just launching, it sounds like, in Oregon. Is that the case?
And this is Camelia. This is Camelia. That was actually just some additional information. Yeah, I was providing to Cynthia because each of the collaboratives, as we said earlier, are on kind of slightly separate timelines. So Oregon is one of the more recent ones that will be getting their funds very soon. So they'll definitely be doing a supplemental information.
Okay, exactly. Great. Great. We have certainly the southern sites as well as Oregon will be doing a lot of supplemental. All right, so you are all unmuted. Wanted to give you a chance to ask any questions you may have about what we've discussed already, about the forms, the whole process of putting together these metrics, any questions you may have.
Althea?
Yes.
This is Felicia. I just wanted to loop back to Sally's question that she asked earlier.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, just so we didn't lose that thread. And Sally, maybe you can clarify. So what I understood you to be asking is that if you screen someone and they're eligible for both DACA and DAPA, how that would be captured in the data. And I guess a follow-up question from me would be, are you thinking about what this would mean right now or in the future when we are implementing DAPA?
Well, I guess these eligibility screenings are going on right now, so even though DAPA isn't implemented, it could come up right now. I mean, someone could be, a college graduate who's been here for 5 years, be 28 years old and have a U.S. citizen kid, so be eligible for DACA or DAPA. And so I think that may be the only place where that comes up because once you get to the application and the renewal, et cetera, you've chosen a path. But I think it's just in the eligibility screening, and I just wondered if there's any guidance on how to either not double count them or if we should double count them or.
Yeah, because I think, presumably they're being screened once for any and all forms of relief. So you would capture, there is a place in the form to capture folks who are eligible for a more permanent form of relief that could lead to a green card. And then, I'm assuming then you'll advise them after that eligibility screening the best pathway forward. So you're counting them once for the purposes of the eligibility screening and then advising them on the next step along the path, and that could be a variety of different things. But you should, be counting them once for the purposes of the screening, reporting what you're reporting on in the form. I don't know if that is helpful or clarifies at all.
So if someone's eligible for both, either just count them under the one that they're advised to go for, or just choose one to count them under? That's not.
Oops, sorry, I'm just having trouble hearing. It sounds like someone's talking in the background. Can you hear me okay, Sally?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I mean, I think, I don't, I'm just trying to pull up the form again. I don't think that we are requiring you to say what they're screened for, but you're counting that eligibility screening. And then you're advising them from there.
I'm wondering then if the question is more, if it should be like 5 above, which is DACA or DAPA. If the question is, if we're trying to capture the number of people who've been screened in general, as opposed to what they were, because they were trying to tell people they should be screening for both. So I wonder if that could just be one number instead of divided like those two, because it could either go into potentially eligible for permanent relief or DACA or DAPA.
That's right. That's right. So you're trying to, sorry, my computer is freezing, so I can't pull the form up in front of me. But I think I understand what you're saying, and that makes sense to me, that you're counting the screening once, and then you're, putting that person into the right bucket, for lack of a better phrase, once they've been screened.
Which is kind of the questions below.
Yeah, and we can. I think that's a good.
Good tweak for us.
A good tweak. Yeah, we'll make that change. Yep.
And if I can ask whoever's not speaking at the time, if you can mute yourself, and that way we'll limit the background noise. Sally, thank you for that
good
question. I think it really clarifies it. Yeah. I see Caitlin has her hand up from Tennessee.
Yes. We have a question. So in our case, the nonprofit organization is serving as the coordinator, but it's also one of the grantees. So do we need to have that nonprofit organization fill out both the grantee and the coordinator form if they would really be the lead on both of the forms?
What a great question. Sally, are you both the grantee and the coordinator?
Yes and no, although we play a different role than most of the grantees because we're not a direct service provider.
Okay.
This is Khaki. This is how I'm understanding it, and you tell me if it's correct. Some of the collaborations or some of the Developing on the Dream locations have multiple locations where their dream work is being done. I'm seeing it that the grantee form collects all that information and rolls up to the coordinator form, and then the coordinator form rolls up to GSER so they can make the report. Is that correct? It's kind of a a flow. Okay, so if you really have one local collaborative, there may be multiple organizations in it, but they're all working on the same outcomes. You really don't have a grantee form that needs to be filled out. You really only have a coordinator form that then flows up to GSER. Would that be correct?
That's exactly right, Khaki, in your case. Yeah.
Lovely. Thank you.
Thanks for fielding that, Felicia.
Yep.
Yeah. Other questions about any of this process?
This is Sally at the ILRC again. We, like maybe some others on the call, this will be the first time that we're engaging the grantees like this. And I'm wondering if folks have any thoughts or experience with how they define the funding. In other words, I know that there's a set pool of funding, but sometimes grantees report on sort of all the DACA and DAPA work they've done. Are we asking for them to report specifically on what they've done with this funding? And is there any sample language around that?
Good question. I believe we want them to report on what they've done with this funding and not with all other funding. And I think, let me pop open the grantee form here. I think it's in our instructions to them from the beginning. Is it?
Yep, that's correct, Althea. So you're counting the work that you were able to complete, Sally, with all of the funding through this initiative, and that would include both the local funding and the national match. but not if they're getting funding, if the grantees are getting other types of funding or other work. That should not be counted here.
I think what we hear a lot is that this is a supplement or a subsidy to their fee-based services, and so if anyone has any thoughts about how they've been able to define that, we don't. If we don't have time now, that's fine. But I'd be just curious if anyone has language or has had to define that for their grantees, or if their grantees have had good definitions of how they've figured that out.
That's great.
So Sally, just so I understand the question, you're wondering about folks who are, maybe doing a large-scale screening. They have some grant funding to support their work, but they're also have a fee-for-service model, and how you kind of unbraid those strands, or if you do. Is that the question?
That's right. Yeah, because if they get, say, $10,000, and that's just to help them, maintain their staff, but the majority of clients they see is on a fee-based, is fee-based services. What sometimes we hear from the partners and grantees is that this just subsidizes so that they don't have to charge as high of fees. But then what they report back to us might look like a much larger number of people that could be served than what $10,000 alone would support.
Yeah. I'm wondering, has that come up for anybody else on the call? I don't know that we've talked about it in those terms specifically before.
Well, this is khaki. Yeah, I can imagine that it would be hard, as you used the word unbraid. I think it would be hard to unbraid some of that.
Yeah.
Now, I think it would be easier if it was different geographic areas or different, different. I think it would be hard for them to kind of parse that apart and say these were funded with GSER money and these were funded with. Easier to say what was funded with fees, but very difficult to say about outreach because it might be funded from various directions, and so how do you know exactly which dollar was a GSER dollar?
Right. Yeah, because I think part of what these funds help to do is to build greater capacity, and a fee-for-service model is an important part of just being able to meet demand for a lot of service providers, and they are doing that on a sliding scale perhaps. So that to me is a little bit different than having another grant, say, that has very specific, its own specific deliverables that you're reporting on.
I'm wondering, Felicia, what you think about us taking this back to just think about it a little bit further and see if we can come up with some language that would be helpful to the grantees.
Yeah, I think that would be good for us just to think about it a little bit more. I mean, it seems to me that it would be very hard to separate it, but that we want to just provide more guidance and clarity so that there isn't any confusion when folks begin to do the report back, Sally. So really good question, and we'll. I agree, Althea. We should huddle and come up with some language that will help guide folks going forward.
And you might look. The New Americans campaign did a financial analysis where they showed, they showed how much. I think it was like $110 or $140 they received from foundations for naturalization applications, but then it was another certain amount from other foundations, certain amount in kind, certain amount fees. So it ended up being more like $400 something per application. So in other words, the 100 per application from foundations doesn't necessarily reflect the cost. These are some of the conversations that we kind of end up getting into with some of the grantees. So any guidance?
Sally, would you mind if we followed up with you afterwards, and as we're developing this, just to make sure it would feel right to your grantees as they looked at it, the languaging for this?
Sure.
Okay, great. Let me move, Caleb, if you'll move to the next slide, because we had some questions for you all as well, and we have a few minutes left, so I want to make sure we have a chance to look at that. And already some of you have brought this up, like Kaki asking, who are the coordinators? And wanted to find out how you all feel about having GSER provide support to your grantees to train them on this form, or if you want to do it on your own. Just popcorn style. Any thoughts about this?
Support would be great.
Okay. Great.
Yeah, I think it'd be great to have support. There, it'd be interesting. I always, it's always confusing when to be hands-on as a foundation and when to keep your hands off. But it seems like depending on how individualized these trainings are going to be, it could be an opportunity for at least a couple of funders and grantees to meet together to talk in more depth about how it's going and how the reporting, so that there's at least some in the funding collaborative that really understand the depth of the reporting. But I think as it unfolds, we'll figure out if there's an opportunity for that.
Okay, great. Are there, you all have given already some great recommendations for improvement. Are there any other tools that would be helpful to you all in either completing the coordinator form or in supporting your grantees in completing their forms?
This is Sally again. Sorry for all the questions. Is everyone going to be?
We're so glad to have you on the phone.
Thanks. Is everyone going to be submitting via Dropbox, or are you just sending us the forms via Dropbox? The reason I ask is because training specifically about how to do Dropbox will probably be necessary for some of the grantees if there's any expectation that they're doing it that way.
Yeah, no, they won't be doing it through Dropbox. They'll have this online form that is JotForm.
Okay.
And maybe you can pull that up real quick if you have
the survey type thing that you
sent.
That
survey, exactly. And
okay.
so they'll complete it there, and what JotForm does is then take all the information and send it to Dropbox, and it'll go to your Dropbox, Sally, or whoever the coordinator is. Yeah, here's the form. So they're just going to fill out that online form. They don't have to deal with Dropbox at all.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay. Great. Good question. And we appreciate having Sally here, not a foundation representative, but one of the coordinators, because it's great to have all the different views of how these tools are going to be used. Any other, was Roberto about to ask a question? Any other questions or comments? We appreciate all the input. We have been through a very thorough vetting process and appreciate that there can still be a few more tweaks. We want to keep in mind that our goals are really about showing the impact, the investment, and the infrastructure in this initiative and being able to respond to our national funders about the good work that's being done on the ground as well as in our collaboratives across the country. If you have any further questions after this, please feel free to contact Camelia or myself. But I think I'll turn it over to Camelia to wrap up and give us the next steps.
Yeah, thanks, Althea. So just to wrap up, I wanted to first remind everybody that this current form that we just reviewed is going to be for the current funding that you all are receiving. So all of that work you're doing right now. And then the second thing is, just as Althea mentioned, you'll be using actually an online form. So although we reviewed an Excel spreadsheet and you received that in your email, what you'll actually be using and what your grantees will be using is the online form that you also got through a link. And then as follow-up, the coordinators will each be receiving a link to Dropbox. That's where you can access the grantee information. You'll be getting email alerts also from Dropbox when the grantee information is submitted. So you'll get that. And then it sounds like folks would like a little bit of support for the grantees. So GSER will work on coordinating probably a webinar or something very similar to just kind of walk through the grantee form and provide some additional support that way. So be on the lookout for that within the next week or so. And then there's some other tweaks we'll be doing. I think Sally raised a great point about just making the number of eligibility screens and intake something that counts both DACA and DAPA, so we'll make that change. And then we're going to follow up with all of you and make some changes in terms of language about funding and fees for services. So we'll take a peek at the NAC financial analysis, and Sally will follow up with you to get some additional thoughts. And then, like we said before, this has been recorded. This is being recorded, so feel free to go back and reference this webinar. And Althea, I just want to see, is there anything else we wanted to share before we say goodbye to folks?
Just want a reminder that we'll be creating individual JOT forms for each collaborative. And we would like to label them with the name of the site of the collaborative, the Houston Collaborative, the Tennessee Collaborative, whatever. Didn't know if you all had any preferences about listing the foundation partners in your collaborative, or if the name is just good enough for you all. If you wouldn't mind letting us know in the chat window, or just a quick email if you have any preference about that. And then I think we'll be putting that together in the next week or so. Is that true, Camelia?
Yep, exactly. That's right.
Great.
Okay, so thank you,
everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. Good brainstorming, good teamwork. We really appreciate this collaborative process. And as the next slide shows, you can feel free to contact myself or Althea with any questions as we're moving forward, and we'll also be in touch in the next week or so. So thank you, everybody, and we'll be chatting with you and connecting with you soon.
Happy week to you all.
Thank you.